really excited. We have this is our February meeting, and this is, if you don't know who we are, we're the local ISC2 chapter, Seattle branch. And we have a great presentation tonight by Jon, but let me just go through a couple of these kind of slides we do every meeting. First one up is our wonderful board members, and here's our leadership team. And I'm Mark Cody. I'm the secretary here, which basically means I get to take tons and tons of notes. But this is the team here that's building this chapter, and we really welcome everybody and try to promote cybersecurity and in this area, and hope we provide some great resources for people, not only currently but in the future, where we have more plans hopefully someday to be doing things in person, but we're trying our best right now through COVID. And just wanted to mention our sponsors, and Jon is actually from our top sponsor, the Caliber Security Partners, and we also have BlackBerry Silence, IO Active, and Cyber Reason, and they kind of help fund us so we can operate and have technology and things like that to help us have these meetings. So let me just kick it off, and I'll kind of just do a quick introduction to Jon. And Jon, I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name, and I'll leave that up to you because I'm probably not going to be able to do it correctly. But he has a great presentation tonight about GRC approaches and how to not bury people in policies they won't follow, which I think is something extremely relevant to all of our professions. And he's currently the practice director and CISO of Caliber Security Partners, has a long career and consulting and leading security. And I'm excited to hear your presentation. So Jon, I don't know if you want to try to hit the share button if you have slides to present.
Sure. Yeah, sorry. My name's Jon Espenschied, and looking at that bio makes me feel old. Let me see if I can get this going. All right. So, is that presenting reasonably well?
Looks great.
Awesome. All right. I had a friend and coworker look through the presentation, and my major mistake was right up front. I'd put 2020, and I'm losing track of time. We've all been kind of in this in couple of years now. We're in year 3 of sort of this oddity. So, but today's presentation, my goal here is to talk about sort of strategies and actions for CISOs and other leaders, anybody who's responsible for GRC, to be sort of more humane, to not bury people in policies, in rules, so that they can't comply. I want to address a little bit of why that ends up happening, some context. Forgive me if I talk a little bit about some sort of big ideas, and then bring it back down to some concrete actions that we can take and try to simplify it. So, again, I'm Jon Espenschied. I've got some history doing this stuff. I've been working with Caliber Security Partners for a few years now, and with the people involved with Caliber for close to a decade and a half. Some folks have known me around here for a little longer, but one of the things I do for Caliber is act as a virtual CISO for a few organizations that are either spinning up their program to eventually onboard a full-time information security leader or other CISOs, And I've done this sort of work for a number of organizations across the US and Canada and a few EU organizations. So I've learned a lot from these clients. I feel very sort of fortunate. It's funny. I was looking at again your intro made me. I look at that and I feel a little bit old, but then I feel really fortunate that I've been able to go into a lot of organizations and help solve interesting problems. And then when it comes for the ugly things like budget time and employee reviews and interdepartmental fighting over who gets to do what and all this, I get to run away. I get to go off and work on somebody else's interesting problems. So I hope that I can distill this down to something that is useful for other folks, and to really get to the sort of again to be able to solve those interesting problems and get on to other business. And well, yes, talks a lot. Um, so let's take I've got about maybe 20 slides here. This is not preamble to some 80 100 slide thing that's going to take forever, but I want to frame the problem and talk a little bit about examples of what doesn't work. um, Big and small. Walked into organizations that had 700-page policy manuals, not an exaggeration, and other folks where I walk in and there's literally nothing. um, and then let's talk a little bit about those big thoughts on governance, and then pull back on some themes from the broader picture, some governmental thoughts onto things that are useful for the kinds of enterprises that are represented here in this meeting in sort of the broader ISACA context. Um, and really, I want to hammer down on coordination and communication. The point of this whole this whole presentation, following bad comedian rules, is to simplify things and give people rules they can follow. So I want to talk a lot about ways to coordinate and communicate, and then some real actions and examples. So getting into it, I think I've now given 3 preambles. We know the scene. Um, in the work context that all of us work in, the folks that are listed down on the left of each of these are pretty common characters in our work lives. Employee can't get their document or finish a process, so they bypass rules, or they ask somebody else to loan an account, or they take documents offline, or they find some uh, um, vulnerability or malfunction that allows them to do a thing that they don't have access rights to. A manager will assign rights to a new employee by simply copying an old one. The antithesis of role-based access. You'll have an IT admin who will just throw open the doors on systems, or worse, an entire environment, because somebody told them just make it work. Um, you'll get CTOs who will require doing something unreasonable. Well, I saw an article about how all these adversaries use PowerShell once they get into an environment, so I'm telling the junior admin to deploy a GPO that blocks PowerShell. Oh, congratulations, your environment stops working. Security admin decides they're going to do a pen test and they don't have criteria to follow. The policy doesn't exist for what they're supposed to do, or the context for doing aggressive testing, and they take down an entire production environment. I think I'm halfway through this list, and I have. Is there anyone I have not caused like bad memories?
I
Um,
Yeah, I feel like this is very familiar.
yeah, I mean, CISO or anybody on the security team emails the entire company because or actually, this example I wanted to drill down on, having a CISO doing an all company email about a privacy breach before the affected parties are notified, which actually makes it worse legally. Um, uh, the next word, the information data worker backs up your entire GitHub tree because everyone on the dev team was invited in using their personal GitHub accounts. I wish this was a joke. This is actually the majority of organizations that I've worked with that use GitHub have this problem. Somebody feels like they're about to be laid off and they just go on a harvesting run. Um, Data privacy officer requires deletion of log data because they received personal data removal request. Well, great, you've complied with the GDPR requirement, but now you're going to fail your next audit because somebody destroyed records. Auditor running that you've retained to do a vendor security program does a reply all next quarter with everyone's reports to everyone on the list. So now you have a small club of all of your vendors who now have everybody gets to see everybody else's underwear. I could go on. There's only one. I'm going to skip the last bullet here, but again, these are very real things. All of these can be traced back to somebody didn't know what the rules were, or they didn't know how to follow rules, or there were no rules, or there was nobody to appeal to to an authority to find out, or they weren't trained. Really, the problem is that we tell people to follow a fairly complex system of rules, or we expect them to understand a complex system of rules that are unwritten. And that we present them with a picture here, and we say, don't you see the rabbit? There's a rabbit there. It's our job to feed the rabbit. Don't you see the thing? Isn't it clear to you? And either they don't see it at all, or it's so complex they do see it, or they see dozens of things. And there's no simple context. There's maybe over convergence, and no one to ask, no clear authority. Do I ask the CISO? Do I ask the CIO? Do I ask my manager? Do I ask HR what I'm supposed to do? And maybe if I just keep my head down, don't look stupid, and do what I think is right, there are no penalties for it, right? And then there's the age-old problem down at the bottom of this of well, security is perceived, or risk management GRC is perceived as disconnected from the business, whatever business you're in, and so that's a diversion. I'm just going to go and sell or do or deliver or implement, and all will be forgiven if I just do the thing I think I'm supposed to do. And I think, especially for those that are sort of early career, or folks who have kind of come into this, been in one place for a long time and don't have context, the solution tends to be pretty blunt. Do your job. Here are the rules. Do it. We tell folks, follow this, the set of rules, or you'll be fired. And they sit there and noodle between the three different things you told them to do. Folks just will lock down systems or applications or services to the point where it actually does become a business impediment. Delete the risk, fix the vulnerabilities. Well, yeah, fix the vulnerabilities. We're not going to, so folks will do things that essentially impede your ability to do upgrades. You can't buy a new product if you demand absolute compliance, zero vulnerability environment. And my favorite from some large organizations where you have intrusions, and folks say eliminate the adversary, and well, that's great if you have a standing army, because frequently you can't chase those those folks. But really, if you're going to be dictatorial about things, it's not workable. It's not a viable solution. So I really want to dig into big and small examples of governance. The smallest, somebody made actually I saw this not too long ago, and somebody made a comment about the world's smallest democracy being a thermostat. And even that sort of a system fails when we can't agree on what the right level is, on what the goals are. Folks will, even in that tiniest of contexts, will battle each other over something as simple as up or down on this. If the costs aren't clear, if the value isn't agreed on, um, it's a simple thing. If folks can figure out a compromise on goals and maybe introduce a timer into things so that the levels can be varied and so on and so forth. But again, it fails if we don't agree on some of those very simple goals. At the other end of the spectrum, when we look at not a democracy, a total dictatorship, how do these can fail as well. um, I was looking for a not terribly controversial example of this, and I thought, Venezuela is a little messy these days, I think it's fair to say. And the governance fails when people can't work. If you're hungry, you don't participate in your in the operation of that enterprise being a country. If no one knows what to do, if the risks are high, if punishment feels capricious, if you may be punished for things that you have no agency in, folks will seek to subvert the dictatorship. And digging into this a little bit, really want to kind of pull some useful themes out of this. So looking a little closer at a democracy. Now, recognizing that most organizations, most companies certainly are not democracies, um, but have like to have a lot of aspects of it. But it's worth looking at what prompts people to subvert a democracy and accept autocracy. Um, Failed economies lead to can't work, can't eat, can't afford housing. People get can't live their lives. Danger to health, safety, and family. I did IT work for the UN in a couple of war zones, and people really don't like to support your organizational goals if they're feel like their kids are being shot at on their way to school. Um, People feel like they're not being heard in whatever context. Um, uh, you know, um, they feel like they can't participate. Um, Oppression of minorities leads to subversion, to folks wanting to be represented. Again, corruption kind of goes without saying, contributes to all of the rest of the things on the list. And in a democratic context, rule of law being too weak and inconsistent leads people to lose faith in the system and to start to fight the system rather than the problems that they have. They people go from wanting to resolve their personal, or sorry, the present issues, the things that are of concern to them as an individual. If the rule of law is too weak, they will start to fight the system. They will start to want to replace the system with something that is at least consistent, if not fair. Um, and if it feels like the system is a fake or a proxy for something else, again, people will seek to subvert it so that at least they can make it consistent. Um, Folks will tend to, if they're faced with concentrated power without feedback and metrics, you'll have a democracy start to fall apart because the system stops functioning, stops being representational, um, because the feedback and metrics don't tell you when things are starting to fail at its goals of being democratic. The other picture looks pretty familiar. Failed economies, can't work, can't eat, can't afford housing, danger to health, safety, and family. Folks really want their. A lot of folks are perfectly happy to live in a dictatorship if it is consistent. If you can, feed your family, if you can work, if the money's worth something tomorrow as much as it is today, um, they work. But if not, if people will seek to subvert or overthrow it. Um, if they feel they aren't being seen. And by the way, there's a lot more commonality to a lot of sort of corporate environments when you look at sort of benign dictatorships. So there's a lot to, I think, a lot to learn here. If folks feel like they aren't being seen, they'll seek to subvert it. If the majority is oppressed in this context, that's a real pressure situation. Developing it develops a sort of powder keg where folks want to go off and do something else. Corruption, again, goes without saying, contributes to everything else. In this context, rule of law being too strong and inconsistent, people react very poorly to what they perceive as capricious enforcement, particularly if it's sort of life and limb. Um, and if a dictatorship feels like it's fake, if there's too much of a show of trying to pretend to be a democracy, um, the strength that people perceive in an autocratic leader or a tribal leader, folks will start to perceive the leadership as weak, and you end up with folks trying to concentrate power elsewhere. And again, distributed power without coordination, you end up with fiefdoms, you end up with military overthrow of the previous leader, and so on and so forth. Um, so these things fail in sort of very sort of in a lot of ways that are common, and a lot of ways that have common themes, even though they're at opposite ends of the spectrum. So forgive that little walk around, but let's bring this back to the organizational governance context. Why do people subvert the company? Why do they walk away? Why do they turn around and compete or steal secrets and IP, or give things away, or commit various other sort of acts of hostility, malfeasance, or just not being nice? Um, there are a lot of reasons. Some of these are out of scope for us, but some of them are very much in scope. Failed economy, just businesses failing, can't work, can't eat, can't afford housing, folks will stop participating. Um, Danger to health, safety, or family. There are a lot of examples of folks being told to do stupid things, being directed, particularly, if there's commonality here, folks are told just do your job, just produce, just implement, just turn on a system. Um, Folks that have been directed to go and run a refinery system at 110% and ignore safety warnings are very likely, if they do that, to then start to ignore a lot of other policy directives. If they're told they will do one unreasonable thing, they'll start to ignore the reasonable things. If folks aren't being seen, if they feel they're not being listened to, there's no feedback from the experiences. They find if folks find problems and want to be constructive and they're ignored. Um, the, Sorry, I was going to say the other way around. If folks can't feedback experiences about negative things and aren't being heard, they'll stop feeding back positive things. People who feel that they aren't being heard won't report intrusions or breaches or misuse of data or other folks who are harvesting things or violating policies. Um, Corruption in an organization, particularly when it's happening, and when I say unseen, I mean like by other parts of the organization, if it's unpredictable, and if there are patsies for blame on it, folks will seek to subvert your entire governance system if they feel like they can't tell when they're going to be blamed for something. Interesting thing, looking back at the previous two failure contexts, if the rule of law is too strong or it's too weak, folks will seek to subvert it, to walk away or replace it, or to stay, essentially just stop participating in your governance system in a company, if it's inconsistent. Randomness really leads to randomness in authority other contexts of application of rules lead people to start to either structurally subvert or to behave randomly themselves. If folks feel like the grass is greener elsewhere, others have it can do the same thing with less risk. A lot of times they'll just walk. That's a different problem. But really, concentration of power without feedback and metrics, or distribution of authority or power without coordination and metrics, these will lead folks to just start to ignore rules, to ignore or subvert. And when I say sort of concentration of power without feedback and metrics, if you have a single authority, if you have essentially a dictatorial C-level, C-suite, or an individual, but there's no feedback, there's no adjustment, no sort of criteria, that's just as bad as having no one in charge, and no coordination. Folks will simply start to ignore the system because the sort of the proximate things that they're supposed to do for their work are inconsistent. So again, we're kind of taking those broader thoughts and bringing it back around these governance themes. People want to work. In general, folks really don't care about the nature of the system as long as it's consistent. People want to know what the rules are. They want to do them. They want to get a paycheck. They want to go home. A level up from that, from just how people are treated. People want to be safe from blame and punishment, gotchas, anything that they don't expect. Even if folks expect know that they can't reach goals or they can't comply, if the punishment is predictable, they'll still participate in a bad system. Just the rules have to be consistent. So the authority needs clear goals. We need to have coordination and feedback. You can run a pretty good dictatorship if you make things reliable, if people can provide for very low level needs. So let's talk a little bit about those, how we apply those themes.
So John, I had
Yeah.
one thing I should have asked you in the beginning. Do you want to take questions as they come? Or do you want to wait
Actually,
till the
I'm gonna
end?
take a little bit of a break here. I have to apologize because I'm projecting. I'm doing a single screen here. I cannot see the chat, so please do break in if there's any big thing. So go for it.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just monitor it. And Brian had a question here. His question was, where does education fit into this?
I actually have a slide on training and awareness in there. Actually, there's a fairly major piece when we get down to that feedback loop and making sure that people feel heard.
Awesome. So it's
I
coming up.
have a piece on that that's coming up.
All right, great.
So with all these lofty goals and lofty ideas and trying not to have this be a three beer conversation, when I come into a company that says we've got nothing, please build us a program, or we have a merger and folks want to reconcile systems, or we need to fix something, we can bring this way down to some fairly straightforward questions. Usually the first handful of these: are there any rules? Is anyone in charge here? Is any of this written down? That is the place to start, even with fairly complex messes, or greenfield where there's just nothing. You got to build something up. But pushing a little further, do the rules that do exist, because in this context, most organizations are not total greenfield. There is something, or there's a long list of policy documents that people just don't pay attention to or aren't aware of. Do those rules help or impede the business? Do they subvert things? Do folks perceive security and privacy policy as being guardrails for their business, for their work, or are they just extra stuff they have to do that leads to no revenue or no success? Do do folks, if they have rules and they know them, do they know when they've succeeded? And also, do they know when they've not met those, or have they failed, or something's gone wrong? Um, and kind of getting to the comment about training, is it written down where people can see it? Is there training on it? Is there any sort of a cycle where folks are given reinforcement? These are the questions. Can a person understand the policies and know what to do? Um, Often folks are asked to sign a document saying they've read all the policies before they're actually an employee of a company, and the policy rule set is considered confidential IP, so they may not actually be able to read it beforehand. But these are the questions that are the foundation of building a set of rules that are actually human comprehensible. So restructuring this, taking kind of the bad examples earlier into the what we actually should do, we need to address a not terribly long list of sort of concepts before we start to develop a framework that's comprehensible. So let's address authority and coordination. I'm going to put I've got a couple of these that are combined onto a single slide. Communication and clarity together. I want to talk about rules and alignment. Consequences, its own separate short topic. And then I want to wrap up safety, feedback, and progress. So kind of jumping into this, authority and coordination. Is someone in control? Well, you have to have some authority for a program where you're going to tell people what to do. That's that authority may reside in a committee. If there's a head for the committee, if there's an even number of people, there's got to be a tiebreaker somewhere. The president of the Senate exists for a reason. The governance committee has to include everyone in an organization who manages rules and risk. If someone can accept risk for the enterprise, or they can direct behavior of people, they tell them they must do a thing regarding a risk or an asset, or anything to do with their role, that is a person that needs to be represented either on a governance committee, or needs to feed information to whatever that authority is. There are a few things when we talk about the authority in kind of the broader scale. GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, is not an IT function. I think we've, for the most part, gotten past the idea that security policy is just another thing that resides under the people that do computer stuff. It is a function of information, not of technology specifically. Again, we're talking about authority. The CISO isn't actually chief anything unless they have reporting authority to the people in the company who accept risk. Your DPO usually has to report to an officer of the company. Again, this is a matter of direct reporting. These people have to have the authority to be able to tell people they must follow a rule as a condition of participating in the organization. The Again, kind of getting back to, you may have a committee. If you're CISO and DPO, or finance officer, or HR, or anybody else, there has to be a reconciling mechanism so that folks don't try to override each other. If your role-based access conflicts with certain principles that are being demanded from HR about mutual support, or if the finance officer is responsible for policies regarding handling of finance data that conflict with the way that accounts are set up, there has to be a reconciling mechanism. And last but not least, corrective action. basically either telling people what to do all the way to the spectrum of terminating a relationship with people. There has to be some authority for that, and I'll talk a little bit about folks stepping on each other's authority toes in a moment. So, and I struggled a little bit with sort of the order of these. I want to talk about the content here a little bit later, but I want to talk first about terminology. We've got so many overloaded terms in this industry that we have to pay attention to the language. Again, kind of key, excuse me, key to the goal for this evening of trying not to bury people under policy, directive, standards, all this stuff, is making the language as simple as we can and being consistent with it. So writing skills are one of the things that I really look for in sort of the folks who are going to deal with developing these programs. Clarity of communication. Just when you pick some words, use them consistently. People often have to be educated on their meaning in the context, and not in the sense of directing people what's right or wrong, but in the context of a particular company or agency or other organization. Tell people how we use these words. Policy generally is a directive to do something. When we talk about policy documents, I will make a difference. Actually, I'll talk about this in a second. Make a difference between sort of capital P policy as a formal directive versus lowercase p policy, which is used by a number of companies in different contexts. We have all kinds of different words for the mid-level of sort of standard or metric. Generally is the document or the thing that falls under a policy that lets you know when you've succeeded, when the directive's been satisfied, establishes some success criteria. I'll talk about that in a second. And the low level here is controls, the things that actually affect some action, some change, operation, other contact with risk or assets. And again, sort of this example of differences in usage, we can thank Microsoft for the group policy object, which, among many, Microsoft's not the worst offender here. A GPO is not a capital P policy. It is a control. It's a configuration. This is a thing, and I think particularly in a lot of technical spheres, folks look at that and they talk about, oh, we deployed the policy. Well, right or wrong, like it or not, the thing we have to do is to make sure that we're being consistent and we understand each other. We can figure out what's right and wrong when we're all retired and looking off into the sunset. But the clarity of expression, just pick a thing and run with it. Write the summaries for training and awareness. Make sure people know what they're supposed to do. If you decide that you want to refer to policies as chickens, just capitalize the C in chicken and use that. Rules and alignment. And I put a couple of stars here to remind myself. I probably should have cleaned this up. This is one of the key areas where we have an opportunity to simplify and to make things, to unbury people from the big pile of policy documents or policy statements. If at all possible, an organization should have one policy repository or link it to one database. And that doesn't mean that the documents all sit in a single folder. It just means that the tracking database, where you have some reference to all of the directives that have to do with systems and networks and data and training and vendor relationships, all the sort of things that constitute the table of contents for ISO 27002 or the annex of 1. If at all possible, have a single repository for those. for those policy documents. And I don't just mean information security. The DPO, the privacy officer, finance policies, behavioral policies, um, if they can, they may reside elsewhere. You know, HR will have its own SharePoint when, finance decides they want to use Google Docs and other shared folders. But if there is a database to track these things, keep them together if at all possible, so that you can create traceability between rules for a single asset. The bad situation, and part of a lot of the basis for a lot of those terrible sort of examples I gave at the top of the hour, um, are people who look at an asset and say, "Well, I got three conflicting rules for this. One org is telling me to say yes, another organization, and another org is telling me no, and my manager is saying choose what you think is best." Um, the only way to really reconcile that sort of mess is to approach something with a some kind of a unified control framework. I see this term more and more. I don't think it's quite a term of art yet, but you can use one of the, a governance product or just a big spreadsheet. It really doesn't matter as long as you can go down a list and say, oh, I've got four different conflicting directives for the same topic. Let's reconcile that. If you do that, you're unburying people. If a policy has no control, if you have a directive that says, um, you know, we must label information with, public, confidential, or super duper secret, but there's no actual control to actually label information, that's a problem. Reconcile that. If a policy has no standard or metric, then people won't know when they've succeeded, and they either won't try or they'll never stop. That needs to be fixed. The only way to trace that is by taking pretty much every policy related to information and putting it into some kind of a unified control framework. Figure out whether the controls have, yeah, sorry, I should say there, this that sort of exercise more often than not tends to drive out things like multiple controls that are implemented because people thought it was the technically diligent thing to do, um, but you end up with orphaned things that are the right thing we thought we were supposed to do, but we weren't actually told to do. There's no policy. Maybe there are missing policies, or maybe you've got duplicated controls. This is the tool to reconcile that. And if you do that, again, you're unburying people. Um, a recent example I had with a client, without disclosing too much on it, SEC requirements for their ERP system resulted in folks looking for separation of duties policies, which had been drafted, but they conflicted with the role-based access policies. If you have a unit, so any kind of a unified control system, the two different groups can look in a spreadsheet, something as simple as a spreadsheet, hopefully, can look up and say, well, access control, what controls do we have? And they can go back and figure out, oh, well, we've got multiple policies that are actually satisfied by a single control. Or if we've got conflicting controls, you at least know who the control owner is and you go off and reconcile it. And that way people don't end up with, being told multiple different things for a simple problem. If at all possible, don't don't write a document if there's no way to track it. If there's no way to kind of keep track of these things. Some organizations do not pursue a document based approach to this. The policy directives and metrics are all kept in a GRC management software or service, and generate things that look like documents only when auditors require them. And other folks have everything in Word doc files in tons and tons of folders, and they just track them with an Excel spreadsheet. whatever works for you, as long as there's some way to look up the documents. So I won't beat this up too much because I talked about it a bunch, but just this and the next two slides talk about policies and directives, policies, standards, and controls. Directives should direct. A policy should have a direction in it. You tell somebody they must do a thing. This is really the opportunity to reduce clutter. If you can get policy directives for what to do or what not to do down to things that are conceptually a half a page, that'd be awesome. A lot of times that, when folks generate policy documents for auditors to look at, they end up being a couple of pages, but don't write War and Peace. These should not, if you have a single policy document that is not a sort of structured, if there isn't a structured subset to it, that is generally an unsustainable approach, and it really subverts training. Folks just will have trouble figuring out what they're supposed to do. But in these short policy documents, state a requirement, give a scope, be done with it. State the authority if you must. You must link to enforcement. Policy documents for particularly to do with data security and privacy shouldn't have duplicated sections on the terrible things that will happen to you if you don't follow this policy. Just point to one enforcement rule and just have that tracked in the database as well. A good rule of thumb for this, if a person, product, or version number, anything that looks kind of like a purchasing standard ends up in your policy, that needs to be removed from it. That's a sign that something's gone wrong. Just a sort of a personal heuristic. If folks are reviewing and revising this kind of policy more than every year or even 2 years, then if the direction of the organization hasn't radically changed, then there's something wrong. Probably needs tuning so that it's not just that it's maintainable, but that it's sort of trainable and comprehensible by mere mortals. I already hashed on this a little bit. The metrics and standards, frequently this is just a paragraph that gets rolled up into each policy. Tell people when they're done. Establish completion or success criteria. People should know when they're done. They should know when they're failing or when they've got a problem. There should be a review cycle for when directives are updated, and just again, if you don't have a success criteria defined for a directive or for a policy document, then folks will either ignore it because they don't know when they're done, or they will just keep trying. The super nice, diligent people will keep trying to do it, but because they don't know they're done, they'll just waste a ton of time on it. And again, this is all about unburying people. Tell them when they're done, then they can go off and do other things. A word about intermittent reinforcement. That's a whole other topic. Just try to be consistent. The controls. I need a much neater graphic for this, but the idea is basically you should end up with a pretty clean taxonomy. But in reality, it's super messy when we do this, but each thing should be traceable to the things that either directed it or affect it. So controls shouldn't be things that try. They should either do a thing or don't, and report failure and report success. And there should be some exception management for what, know when things aren't working. A lot of that's a functional topic for IT or behavioral, for training and so on. But if it's possible to integrate your control tracking with the policy database, that's great. A lot of orgs, it's simply too complex to do that, but you can reference between these operational databases. But having that traceability will drive out duplication or situations where folks are directed to do conflicting things. So that's my 3 slides on policy, standards, and controls, kind of pulling back up to training and awareness. Um, to the earlier comment about training, this may be the most important thing you do, not just because of the, I mean, I'm supposed to say something like people are the most important security control that you have. Yes, that's true. And I don't mean to make light of that, but people are not just an endpoint security control. They're a fairly critical feedback mechanism. So if you do good training, if you take your policy and standards, and you do training, if you take all of the policies, reduce them down to a directive sentence, and you group them together, and you get it down to an hour's worth of annual or quarterly security training, and you train people on it, the process of doing that, either in the development of the training itself or in the delivery of the training, is turns out to be one of the most effective ways to drive out duplication, because it's in those training sessions, and it's in those in the process of explaining things to other people, that we as security people end up actually reading those policy documents, and we end up telling people, oh, you've got 4 different policies relating to your handling of information from you know a foreign vendor, or healthcare data, or national security data, or information, personal data that's exchanged between California and Massachusetts. And it's in those training sessions that the trainees will come back and say, you just told me to do 3 different things with 2 different kinds of data. And doing both the feedback mechanism and the testing on training and awareness is one of the most useful and effective methods of finding duplication, of finding conflicts, of driving out old redundant, old stuff that isn't relevant anymore, or redundant stuff. And this, again, people will unbury themselves if you give them the opportunity. More broadly on training processes, testing of training should really happen without fear of reprisal. If you're going to test your training by doing things like surveys, that's great, but the metrics aren't really good. If you end up doing fish testing, um, uh, you should really make sure that folks aren't afraid to report, oh, hey, yeah, you got me, I clicked. The testing itself should not lead to punishment. In almost every case, it shouldn't. I mean, there are always exceptions, but really, there folks should feel like they can participate and make themselves better without being punished for getting less than 100%. Um, and an idea that I find particularly effective is that the security awareness, if you're doing monthly reminders, things like that, rotate it around. Um, because if you're reconciling control policies and controls between multiple different parts of your organization, well, then maybe the messages around handling that unified, this unified set of behaviors and controls, so, this month should come from IT, next month should come from finance, but they should point back to a unified set of rules that you developed by going through the processes I described before. Consider a rotation schedule for that. If nothing else, even if the repository is a mess, even if the policies aren't all clean and fixed, and we haven't reached that panacea, um, giving folks a consistent messaging from different parts of the company, you're likely to get a lot more participation and compliance. Were there questions on training? Did I kind of hit the points you were looking for? Or I can just wanted to pause for a sec.
I think the original question was from Brian. Um, you're welcome to unmute or just throw it in the chat if you have any follow-up he said, "Yep, you covered it." So
Awesome. Okay.
yeah,
I said I'd cover this super briefly. Consequences. Look, have them. Um, I run into this occasionally with folks, particularly when we're talking about repeat offenders, with folks that insistently do dumb things, or folks that are really just bordering on malicious or fully malicious. Um, uh, Security admins don't fire people. Just I think that's sort of a truism. I don't need to dwell on it too much. I think where it causes us problems is that a lot of organizations write policies as if security admins do fire people, and it's an opportunity to actually simplify policies if you just come up with a reference that says that differentiates between things that are mistakes versus things that are employment relationship terminating offenses. If there's an opportunity to simply refer to your equivalent or your HR or equivalent policies, do so. Policies should not be repetitive or have long monologues about the bad things will happen if you don't do it. Just refer to the policies for the org that does have that authority.
I got to say one thing. You must get a lot of comments on this photo. I think it's amazing. I mean, he's he's multitasking.
Yeah, that's it does
That's
seem representative of certain organizations.
that's great.
Um, so the last piece where I kind of had that sort of principles that we kind of pull forward from a lot of those sort of governance situations. Safety feedback and progress. I mean, this basically comes around to kind of the tail end of the discussion around training. Once you've trained people and they know what to do, you want to lower the risk for people reporting. Um, Folks, you should always have people reporting incidents or problems or errors or full on breaches, or what they think they are. They should always be erring on the side of slightly false positives rather than false negatives. And so folks shouldn't be punished for reporting something for slightly overreacting. It's slight overreacting. Um, if there's retribution for false positives, that will cause people to not report not just incidents, but not report problems that they see or malfunctions in controls or conflicts in policies. You want to reinforce folks, and I think that it's worthwhile in your training somewhere along in pretty much every organization that does this kind of training, the typical training and awareness program. Tell folks that a reportable, low level reportable incident or reportable event is finding a problem with one of your policies, or finding the conflict, or reporting that something is now out of date, and give those folks feedback. um, Feedback increases participation at an exaggerated percent, but it it definitely works a lot more than just demanding that people tell you things. If they tell you things and you give them feedback, hey, that was useful, we reviewed that, and sometimes we make a change, and sometimes, hey, we decided the risk was okay, but you were heard. Those folks are going to be your best input in the next round when something more critical happens. Um, but really, I think the opportunity to simplify based on people's feedback, you really have to cultivate that. So you have to make it safe for people to report kind of brain dead simple IT security problems, and then once you've kind of cultivated that environment where people know what's worth saying and they feel safe saying it, then you're going to get actual thought. and folks will give you information that's useful for making a simplified system. So um, even if the results are negative, let people know. My examples here are somebody responding to a fire versus my experience as a volunteer firefighter up in Friday Harbor. um, 90% of the calls you just end up backing up the truck without having rolled any hose out. So um, but you really want folks to respond to let you know when they think something could be improved, when something's happening, when there's a risk. So that's almost a gardening conversation. So are we good? This all clear? Super. um Wanted to distill this down. So principles for, again, unburying people: speak with one voice if you can, reconcile the rules in any way that you find suitable for the org. Again, there's lots of governance, SaaS products or software, or you can just build it yourself and in great big databases. I tend to not like to leave people with things they got to pay money to see their own rules in. So big spreadsheets are preferable to super elegant things that cost money and people don't use. For the complicated stuff, look, people don't want to read long tomes. They're not going to read War and Peace. But if you do, I maybe interpretive dance here. Maybe I should just say your lightning talk. My thought here was, do things even if they're unpleasant, make them blissfully short, please. Um, Reinforce the messages. You can train anything. People, people are wonderful, intelligent, brilliant, but sometimes they just behave like goldfish with the 10-second memory. You still, reinforcement will get compliance and eventually understanding, and maybe even participation in constructive feedback. Um, but think back more towards kind of that dictatorship, how to not have your dictatorship fail or have your democracy fail. You really want people to feel heard and to have the system be predictable. So feedback loops are critical. Predictability, if you can follow that sort of unified control framework structure in any way, that will help keep your system sustainable and make people feel like they are part of their own risk reduction. And transparency, again, if you take that sort of an approach, clarity of communication is absolutely key. So reducing even more, look, speak with one voice, reconcile. If you grab this presentation later, um, really the point down here is that we have to simplify and communicate, and do these activities with a sense that people, we're dealing with, at the end of the day, we're dealing with people, and we want to make things as consistent as they can. I mean, there's sort of Maslow's hierarchy here. You have to satisfy some very basic safety and security, uh, um, um, sort of emotional needs before people will start to cognitively participate at a higher level and really kind of engage. So there's a lot of pre-work to do simplifying things, but once you do, you can actually have a workable system, even if you've got a complex set of rules for how you have to operate. Um, Wrapping up a little bit, just for sort of us, for this crowd here. Um, Even if you cannot do a lot of the things that we just talked about. Even if the rules are terrible, even if you can't fix them, even if you have organizations that won't participate or want to have their own fiefdoms, you can still work on clarity. With an uncooperative entire rest of the organization, a CISO or a DPO can still focus on the clarity in their own arena, produce kind of good visible rules, and make it fairly clear when things are succeeding or not succeeding, and you can actually affect change without changing the whole world. So um, direction, being direct, being clear, structuring as much as you can to drive out duplication and conflict. Don't be afraid to make those big spreadsheets. That's my talk. That's my John talk. Um,
Thanks, John. That was excellent. I'm trying to look at, there's some really direct questions in the chat, but it's more about kind of lowering risks and how to start, and that maybe if you have some recommendations there.
lowering risks in sort of in what context?
Well, it sounds like and I'm trying to speak for Jeff, unless you want to kind of speak up. It sounds like
I can speak up.
Oh, go ahead. That'd be awesome.
So, John, I just took my final exam in my computing security course today. And one of the questions on the test, and I can talk about it now since I've turned in the test and it doesn't make any difference anymore. But the scenario is one of your employees finds a USB thumb drive lying on the ground and takes it into work and plugs it into the computer. And not only now is their computer full of ransomware, but it's spreading out through all the company. And the question is, how does this person report that my machine is the one that started all this? And which is something that you got to know, because you got to know where to start cleaning it up. But how does he report this and still be anonymous? And my answer on the test was, I don't know.
Yeah, well, so I mean, it's a I think it's both a entirely realistic situation, situation, and a terrible question, because they can't really remain anonymous. I mean, I think it's a cultural issue. I mean, so you the reality of it is, in that situation, um, you want to know, you want the thumb drive, you want the machine, you want to know where the thing started, you want to have some idea. I mean, just not in this order. Obviously, you need to triage and do whatever's necessary to contain the network and the affected systems and so on. But in the series of actions that the incident responders will want to take, you'll want to have kind of the evidence of the source. The person is going to need to, or you're going to want the person to essentially turn in their machine, turn in the thumb drive, any container, any information leading to where the thumb drive was found, or if it was mailed to them. You want all of those things. And what you want to have done with 2020's hindsight is to have a culture, to have developed a culture where folks feel comfortable doing that, reporting that, without fear of sort of reprisal. You want you want people to feel reasonably free to say, I made a mistake. Folks that get sent, that their manager gets notified and they get sent to retraining, and some black mark shows up in their employment record if they get anything less than 100% compliance. That's a nice idea, but it's not a nice idea. It's sort of the full compliance idea that a lot of security leadership has, but it's not really workable. So I think a better question on that test would be, what are the desired outcomes here? How would you go about it? Folks are not going to be infallible at any point. So you have to work on a system of rules and directions and training and feedback that allows for people to have for people to make those errors. Um, I could go on at a long, at length about that, but I think there's an important distinction to be made. I mean, I think a lot of these conversations come back to kind of in an engineering context, the difference between error and mistake. Um, and I realizing that I used the wrong term just a moment ago. If somebody has error in their behavior, they're super diligent 99% of the time, but that one time they picked it up and thought, oh, what is this? Versus a mistake where they fully did a grand scale wrong thing. Whatever you call that, however you discuss it, we need to have in our policies and our responses and our training that folks are not we have an allowance for human error, and that folks can report that without increasing risk to themselves. So
Kind of, sort of. I mean, the whole point of the question was it was deliberately designed to be a bad question, because the intent of the exercise was to get people to think about it a little bit. I'm kind of curious how the instructor is going to grade it, but
yeah,
we'll see.
yeah, I have argued with a lot of questions on a lot of tests of that sort, and I think at the end of the day we have to be sort of reasonable leaders and actors in this arena. So
Yeah, I think some comments in the chat kind of make sense. You try to make it a teachable moment and don't be punitive, as you were saying, John, and because you don't want people to be afraid to report things. I mean, that's
right.
that's the last what you want, and it it can be a challenge. It's a balance, and I saw him read your slides. You don't want to, sometimes you have to be Darth Vader, or or potentially, which that makes sense to me. But at the same time, you kind of want that collaboration and try to have people in your organization see you, as as a positive resource, not a negative all the time. So
Yeah. I
yeah.
was actually using Darth Vader as a positive in this.
Oh, were you?
I just if you're a worker bee on an Imperial starship, you probably know exactly what you're supposed to do.
Right. Yeah,
The
that's a
rules
great
are
point.
clear. The clarity is really good. A lot of other things not so good, but clarity. But there's that's a whole talk on itself.
So I had one question, and I don't see any more in the chat here. So you've seen a lot of clients, a lot of organizations. How do you get the buy-in from leadership, especially when you're in an organization that doesn't care about security, or maybe they're hiring you because they do care about security, or they're hiring you because there's a problem or some compliance that they painfully are going to have to follow? What has been your strategies in that regards?
Couple of different thoughts on that. I mean, it's, and I know it sounds a little bit corny, but you really have to stop thinking about security as a cost center, because a lot of the time, I won't throw out excessive precision on this, but a lot of the time this sort of this sort of question or resistance comes up from folks who do not connect risk as it's interpreted by security or privacy professionals. They don't connect it to money or time, and I think it's incumbent on us to make that connection for them. And I, more often than not, it's sort of this becomes a missed opportunity to show security controls and privacy and other sort of contexts, but in general, infosec should be a business enabler. And I say that because um, for a couple of things. One is if you can reduce the risk to your business, you can then do more, you can sell more, you can produce more, you can take more business ventures if you're protecting your processes and assets effectively. So if you are able to um, allow the organization to take additional business risk because you're reducing the sort of asset and operational risk, then you're actually enabling folks to just straight up make more money. And a sort of concrete example might be by having more careful role-based access in your management of a um, code repository or a configuration repository or product design or something like that. The better access management means that you can then uh, have some connected. You can open it up to vendors, or you can manage vendor accounts or partner accounts more effectively. You could actually share data or develop products or do more profitable collaboration with other entities and still remain compliant or still reduce risk in a way that's not possible to do if you're just doing example-based access management. You can't do onesies and twosies with thousands of employees. Um, Another way to kind of pitch this is that if you're an organization that is regulated in some way, whether it's by sort of um, contractual obligation like PCI, or if it's regulatory like HIPAA or their GDPR, or sort of the RBI rules in India, or KFC. There's just a number of other contexts that I've worked in. If you're in a business, your competitors have the same restrictions. It's it would be an extraordinary situation for any organization in a particular business to be under rules that just don't apply to your competitors. So being compliant, being able to operate, being able to implement and be more efficient is then a competitive advantage. Not in the sense of sort of in a complete greenfield sense, but nobody operates in lawless, unregulated environments. There's always something that we have to do if we're like operating in functional countries that have basic systems and currency and so on. So we're under some rules, and our competitors are under the same rules. So if we can operate more efficiently, that's a competitive advantage. And taking that to its kind of its extreme, had one business say, well, why do we want to be SOC 2 compliant? Why do we want to go through this? Well, our competitors didn't do it. And the sometimes it's just being able to present to customers and say, we're more, we protect your data better, and our competitors are cowboys that are going to cost you money in the long run. Other times, turns out you are bound to actually do some sort of guarantee, or some sort of assurance. But kind of the conversation boils down to, if you and your competitors are all compelled to do some arbitrary thing, it doesn't matter whether it's comply with these 140 rules, or it's dance with a chicken on your head. If you can dance with a chicken on your head more efficient than your competitors, it's an advantage. Therefore, it's a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I never even thought of that you could sell it as you could sell being more secure as a competitive advantage. That makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
that,
I mean, if you
so,
really want to dig into it, particularly sort of mid and larger size businesses, um, if you're compelled to buy insurance and in some ways have to have sort of cyber insurance or ransomware riders on your business insurance,
yep.
the cost of complying sometimes is actually less than the cost of the premiums.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, I think, we kind of went over a little bit, but it's, just kind of show this is such a great discussion. I think it's kind of reason why we did go over.